Schwartz. Shore. Weibel. Alex. Anderson. Bergson. Carter. Cowart. Esri.
Here.
Harper. Harrison. Hartkey.
Here.
Jay.
Here.
Maxwell.
Here.
McGuire.
Here.
Michaels.
Here.
Mitchell.
Here.
Quisenberry. Petrie.
Present. All right, a quorum is present. Clerk, continue to read the notice of the meeting, please.
Notice is hereby given that a study session of the County Board, Champaign County, Illinois, will convene on October 27, 2015, at 6 p.m. in the Lowell Shields Meeting Room, Brookings Administrative Center, 1776 East Washington Street, Urbana, Illinois, in said county, for the purpose of the nursing home financial forecast.
Thank you. A motion to approve the agenda. All right, Mr. Shore and then Mr. Rosales. Any changes to the agenda? If none, signify by saying aye for approval. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The agenda is approved. I have 2 slips for public participation. If any others in the audience would like to speak to us, please fill out a slip and bring it up. For those of you who've not been at our meetings previously, we allow 5 minutes for each individual speaking before the board, with a total of 60 minutes for public participation. The first individual I have is Douglas Goodwine. Oh, Jack, yes.
I'd just like to make a brief introduction. Mary Hobson is here. She's a member of the Nursing Home Board, Executive Board. So wanted to welcome her here this evening, and those of you who aren't familiar with her, that's why she's here.
Thank you, Jack. And since you've done that, we'll just jump ahead a little bit. Would you like to move to suspend the board rules so Mary can participate in any questions or discussions for the evening?
Yes, I would. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, a second. All those in favor of suspending the rules this evening, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. All right. Thank you very much, Jack and Mary. Welcome to join us. Back to public participation. Sorry for the short derailment there. Douglas Goodwine, please step up, and there is a microphone and a button right in the very center which will turn on the microphone, and you'll know that it's on when the red light turns on. Excellent.
My mother was at Champaign County Nursing Home for 3 years and 2 months and around $260,000. This is the last time I can appear before you with authority because I have been coming to the nursing home every day for the past 3 years and 2 months. During that time, I cleaned her room, washed her clothes, made sure she had meals when I was there, made sure she had help to get to the bathroom when I was there, made sure she got to doctor's appointments, took her to music and activities in the building, worked to get her clothes and reclining chair back from the nursing home during the scabies scare of 2013, changed light bulbs and other light maintenance, and just tried to get good care for my mother. I finally found out how to get good care. During the last 3 days of her life, my mother received good care, the kind of care I tried to get for her the previous 3 years, so I know it can be done. During the last 3 years, my experience with the nursing home upper management were less than stellar. As are all bureaucrats, they're expert at making excuses, passing the buck, smoke and mirrors, and prevarication. I've been up and down the halls of the nursing home trying to get good care for my mother, mostly without success. Don't get me wrong, CCNH has many good employees. Many nurses and CNAs are very good. A few are angels. The transportation department is excellent. Physical therapy was exceptional before you changed companies and personnel. Activities is very good. Restorative is good. The only exceptional upper management employee I had experience with was the former head of social services. She lasted only 14 months before CCNH ground her up. Exceptional employees don't seem to stay long. The nursing home needs to be run for the benefit of the residents, not for the benefit of management as it is now. My inquiries have turned up 3 good area nursing homes, Meadowbrook and Urbana, the nursing home in Paxton, and the nursing home in Gifford. CCNH used to have an excellent reputation when it was back in the old building, and the county ran it. So it is possible for the nursing home to be run well. It used to be run well, and I hope it can be run well in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is David Lake.
My name is David Laker. I must admit that I didn't think much of the nursing home before I had to use it. My wife's been in there 19 months. And it taught me how badly we need this nursing home. As Doug said, we're pretty lucky with the overall employee picture we have at the nursing home. We've got some people there that really care about the residents, their job, and doing the job right. Mr. Carter was just up there. I think you'll bear that out for me. My wife gets good care. In some cases, she gets outstanding care. In some other areas, it seems like it just slips and something happens, especially on a weekend if you're dealing with agency staff or temps or part-timers that don't know the residents, they don't know the need of the residents, and consequently, they don't know the functioning of the nursing home. And consequently, things do not go well on the weekends. Weekends are Chinese fire drill. It's just really bad. We're coming in, this meeting is, I guess, about talking about the future financial considerations for the nursing home. I appeal to you people to find out a way to keep it going, because we need it. But there are some things. I have a thing that I'm interested in, since it's finances that you're going to be interested in, that using the nursing home management's own numbers, I was able to put together a paper that identified somewhere around $2,400,000 that is being spent there in excess of what is needed. One of the reasons we spend about $120,000 to $25,000 a year, every year, just to run weekends. This is over and above the normal 5-day-a-week nursing home. Now those are not funny numbers. They're real. That's agency expenses, overtime, and temporary help, people double shifting. And that problem needs to be addressed, because if you don't address it, it won't go away. And when you're talking about a line item of about 120 grand, it's worth looking at. We're paying for a management group that I think the nursing home board is not altogether satisfied with. And that's about a $300,000 and $400,000 a year expense. On top of that, we have an administrator that we hire that reports to the management group, another 100 grand. And then we get to food services. Food services, we also have a management group for about 200,000, 180, something in that range. So, you know, we're spending money, but I don't feel that we're getting our bang for the buck out of that. Do you? And we need to address those issues, because today, with the condition the state's in, we need to watch what we're spending and how we're spending it. And everything counts over there. I feel that our strengths are our people. We've got a good bargaining unit. They work well with the management team. I feel that they've got some issues that they need to work on shift work in order to eliminate this weekend stuff, with all this overtime and what have you. And I think that that's something they can do. And anyway, that's pretty much what I got to say. I would like to have these entered into the record. There's enough copies for everybody to.
Thank you, Mr. Laker. Next, I have Dennis Stubblefield.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for the encouragement from board members to attend this meeting. And the encouragement has come from, for me, unexpected quarters. My mother died on the 31st of July of this year at the age of 93 and a half. And although she was not in a nursing home in Champaign County, she was in a nursing home, assisted living, we called it, for Mother. But she was there for the last 6 years of her life. And it was a struggle for Mother, and it was a struggle for the family. So on a personal level, I'm very empathetic with the challenges that face families and individuals that are in need of assisted living. I also appreciate very much the struggle that is facing you, the county board, in what shall we do with the county nursing home. And it's a very difficult struggle. But for me, it's a very easy thing to do when we trust the voters of Champaign County, to advise the county board. It's a heavy load that's placed upon you in this responsibility. This is the first time experience for me to be here to address the county board. But I would encourage the county board to trust the voters, and trust the voters with this question, because I think it's really a reasonable question, and I think there are two alternatives that are very clear. Either a binding referendum to sell the nursing home, or raise our taxes. Raise our taxes here in Champaign County. The state of Illinois, the good thing about the state of Illinois being broke, very broke, the most broke of any state in the nation. We lead New York, we lead California. We have arrived at the bottom of the heap as a state. We're embarrassed by that fact. But the good thing about the state of Illinois being broke is that we now understand we're not going to get the help here in Champaign County from the state of Illinois. So it's a very easy decision to make if we allow the voters to answer the question and take the load off your backs. And I'm sure that this county board, while it may, from what I have been reading and watching, while the county board may not trust itself entirely, I really believe that probably every person on this board trusts the voters when the question is asked, shall we raise your taxes or sell the nursing home? A binding referendum, not a resolution, a binding referendum. Take the load, take the responsibility off your own backs. It's a very difficult decision. I personally would not want to make the decision when the money is in other people's pockets. The people who are paying for it should be asked the question. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share, and I appreciate the encouragement to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stubblefield. Seeing no others in the audience who would like to speak, I will close public participation for this meeting. And now we will move to Mr. Gima to talk to us about the 5-year projections, which is the main topic for our evening. Yes, Mr. Herkey.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a short comment because Mr. Laker's here and because we're about to go into a very long financial discussion. I wanted to talk a little bit about the labor negotiations that we have been involved in at the nursing home. And I think they're going to bring some real productive results. We've been in direct negotiation with AFSCME on a reopener on some contract issues that are including everything from changing how we do our shifting to adding more of a weekend differential so we get people more encouraged to work on the weekends, and to even just do some flat-out raises and some experience raises so when we bring people in that have some years of experience, their pay and salary can reflect that. So I just wanted you to know that, of course, there's always more to do, but we are addressing that aspect of it specifically, and we hope to see results over the next few months as we go through those negotiations and get more people on at a better rate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harkey. Mary, did you want to share anything, or Jack or Lorraine, on this particular aspect? What Mr. Harkey was just talking about, any upcoming changes that you would like?
I'm not involved in the union negotiations,
Okay.
so I can't respond to that.
Nothing, neither of you. All right, fine. Mr. Gima, you've handed out a new document for us, and I think is the microphone still on? I can't, yeah. Thank you very much. Welcome. And would you please introduce your colleague?
Good evening, everyone. With me is Gary Winchell, who is MPA's Director of Financial Services. Best way to put it, he's our numbers guy and helps a lot with budgeting and financial forecasting, and had assisted me in the 5-year projection and some of the other work we're going to be talking about later on this evening. So what you have in front of you is an updated 5-year projection memorandum. And what was changed was just if you take a look very quickly before I go into the details of these projections, if you go to page 6, because you have an earlier copy of this, and due to feedback, I made some changes in the summary of the 5 different scenarios. And the difference, as you can see, is we included the entire debt service payment. If you look towards the bottom of the spreadsheet, in the previous version, you had interest expense for the debt service that the nursing home is responsible for. The interest was included in an administrative expense. and we showed the principal payment. So we took out the interest and included that in the total debt service payment number. So you can clearly see what the debt service is to the facility on an annual basis. We also took out depreciation out of administrative expenses because the county does their accounting on a cash basis. So you will see your administrative expenses. Basically, our depreciation expense is about $700,000 plus or minus a few thousand on an annual basis. So if we turn back to page 1. Now, my direction in putting together the 5-year projections was specifically to determine the impact of the Medicaid payer mix, or the number of Medicaid that we have in the facility on the financial performance of the facility. So the baseline that was used for these projections was the 2016 budget. And what you will see in the spreadsheets in the different scenarios is the 2015 annualized data that was based on April financial statements, and then the 2016 budget, and then projections through 2017 to 2020. So what you see in this document are some of the assumptions that we used in deriving the 5-year projections. And what we did was try to keep it as simple as possible. So what that basically means is we try to limit the number of assumptions or changes that are going on in each of the 5-year projections. So just to try to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. But in general, the biggest difference in each of the scenarios is the Medicaid payer mix, keeping basically the overall census stable, except in the last scenario, which is we reduced the overall census from 206 to 195. So on page 1, what you see here, again, the overall census remains constant at 206 in every year in the projection. Our Medicare census will increase by 1 per year, and private pay census decreases by 1 resident per year.
Yes, Diane.
I'm sorry, but right off the beginning here, it says that the overall census remaining constant at 206. I think our census right now is in the 170s.
Correct.
So I'm looking at a swing of 30 to 35 in less than a 1 year's time, and I had a little hard time grasping that as far as these projections went, thinking that maybe we should be a little more close to reality, maybe a figure of the 180 to 185-ish or something like that, certainly a growth. But if you can explain to me where you got the 206, because that is a lot of people to remain constant in a 1-year period. Please.
So we're putting these projections together, and I'm going to have you, maybe this is a good segue to the other information that I have in the packet, which starts on page 15, which is I did a market analysis that includes the nursing homes in Champaign County, plus Heartland and Paxton, because they do get a lot of Medicare referrals from the local hospitals. And so the reason for this is Champaign County Nursing Home is not working in a vacuum. We are in competition with the other facilities for census and beds. So if you take a look on page 17, and so the information that you see in all of these exhibits that start on page 15 come from the Illinois Medicaid cost reports. So every nursing home that takes Medicaid is required to submit an annual Medicaid cost report. So this is the best data that we have on our competitors. And so the data that I have here is between 2009 and 2014. 2014 is the most recent data available, and it just came out a couple of months ago. So if you look on page 17, Champaign County Nursing Home, Champaign-Urbana Nursing and Rehab, which is about 200 beds. Heartland of Champaign is about 100 licensed beds. Those two facilities are our main competitors. And the other facilities in the list, I would call our secondary market or secondary competitors. If you take a look, all occupied beds in the table on page 17, the overall census has been declining. within the county. No surprise. And it's from 741 occupied beds or actual residents in the buildings in 2009 down to just under 700 by 2014. And if you take a look at most of the facilities have seen a decline, especially Champaign-Urbana Nursing and Rehab. They dropped from 184 to 123. But Champaign County Nursing Home has actually seen their census increase during that period. So even though we're seeing contraction in the marketplace to a certain extent, we've been able to increase our census during that time. Champaign-Urbana Nursing and Rehab goes from 184 to 123. Heartland of Champaign has gone from 88 to 81. So we have more than held our own in terms of overall census, overall market share. So when I see these numbers, it tells me that we are in a very strong place over the last 5 or 6 years, and there's no reason why we can't see our census be maintained in what I have in the budget. Now, compared to where we are right now at 175, I call this a very cyclical event that's going on because every nursing home in the area is seeing their census decline. And it's primarily because the hospitals are slow. Why do I say that? Or not that hospitals are slow. Why is it a cyclical event? In our other markets, what we've seen hospitals do is actively try to move patients directly from the hospital to home. We've seen it in DeKalb County, we've seen it in other counties, and it has seen a decrease in the overall Medicare referrals. What we're seeing right now is no patterns, there's no activity by the hospitals in trying to avoid admitting people to the nursing homes. It's clearly just slow activity over the last couple of months.
Do you want a follow-up question?
Just real quickly
Yes.
here. I remember the charts that you had up here, not specifically, of course, but I'm trying to remember what our average was for the year, and I just don't, for some reason, I was thinking that most of them are declining, and therefore I would hate to hang our hat on something way up here when something in here may be a little more realistic. I was trying to think, do you kind of remember what our average for the year has been?
Our average right now is about 195.
Okay, thanks.
So again, right now, as of today, our census is 174. Actually, probably it's up to 176 because we had, 175. We had 2 admissions, both Medicare, and we had 1 discharge. So, and again, we are still seeing a high number of inquiries or referrals from the hospitals, anywhere from 30 to 40 plus. But again, we are starting to see some of these referrals are, I talked about this before, younger age with behavioral issues, alcohol, drug issues that we're just not going to take. And we remain picky about the residents that we take. We're not going to take a Medicare just because it's a Medicare. We are only going to take the seniors that we know that we can take care of, and we're not going to take residents at the expense that it may cause issues within the facility. So when I see our inquiries remain at a high level, not that I'm not worried that the census is down, I don't want to see the census down, but it tells me that it is not a permanent issue and that we should be able to rebound, especially based on what we've seen over the past few years. Now, if I've seen trends, so for example, let's go to private pay. So let's go to page 30. Or actually, let's back up to page 28 so you can see all of the private pay days in the marketplace. So on page 28, we have seen a pretty steep decline in overall private pay days in the marketplace. Now go to page 30. And you can see that our private pay census, despite the decline overall in the market, we've remained pretty steady. I mean, we fluctuated from 70 in 2009 to a low of 62.5 in 2011, but we're back up to 67.8 in 2014. And I can tell you this year, we've been averaging about 70 private pay. Now take a look what's going on with Champaign-Urbana Nursing and Rehab in Heartland of Champaign. CUNR has dropped from 82 to 22. Heartland of Champaign has lost half of its private pay census. So again, this tells me that if you go to page 31, and you take a look at our private pay market share, which is the percentage of our days as a percentage of all the days in the area, we've actually seen our market share for private pay increase from 25% to 35%. So we are capturing a larger market share of the private pay. Now, and you take a look at what's going on with the other facilities, everyone else except for Heartland and Paxton, in Helia, which has a very small private pay market share, everyone else is seeing a decline in their private pay market share in the community.
Thank you very much. Next, Mary Hudson, and then Jim McGuire, and then Ms. Bergson.
Mr. Gaiman, I just wanted to ask how much of an effect the fact that Unit 4 is currently closed for refurnishing and rehab, and so that's, what, 22 beds that you currently cannot fill until at least November 1st, or whenever the unit's finished. How much is that affecting the decline in the census currently?
It has absolutely no effect because of the additional open beds that we have on the other 4 units. If anything, it was, not that it was planned, but it was good timing that we shut down that unit for renovations because we were able to actually consolidate our staffing on the other 4 units, which saves us a few dollars instead of keeping Unit 4 open. But again, it was not a conscious effort to do it because the census was declining. It just was a coincidence.
Thank you.
Mr. McGuire.
Okay. I guess all these numbers flying around, I'm a little confused. When I look back at page 17, after some of the discussions Diane talked about, and what we're going to consider for our censuses in each of the categories, whether they're Medicaid or Medicare or private pay, and you talk about what's on 17 and the occupied beds for all these different nursing homes, and you're saying that the number of occupied beds has dropped throughout the area, and ours is averaging at 200 for 2014, and that's a year. Each one of these are years, they're not one individual month, right? Okay, just to make sure we have the right information. And that we have a higher percentage of private beds, like you said, from one of the other pages, 28.
Right, we've been able to actually increase our private pay market share because we've been able to maintain a level private pay census while everyone is seeing their private pay census decline. So that increases our market share of private pay.
But from my understanding, we've been in 175 beds for the last 2 or 3 months. So how can we have a higher number of, I mean, you make it sound like it's going wonderful, but at the same time, we've got a lower census, which affects the bottom line.
Correct.
And we've got to we have to understand this to decide what to do in the future. And you might tell us that things are going to be more rosy in the future, but that hasn't been anything in the past, so why would we expect it to increase when the whole market seems to be changing and the numbers seem to be dropping, while we may capture a greater portion of what's out there, but at a lower census. And at 54% for Medicaid, when we're supposed to be subsidizing the nursing home so we can serve more Medicaid patients, what is the private private nursing homes Medicaid average? Is it higher? Is it lower? Is it only 40%? I mean, I thought we were supposed to be doing more of that, not less of that. Just to give us a kind of a understanding. But there are.
Mr. McGuire, okay, to answer your first question, so again, what I see going on with the overall census right now is we always are going to have these ebb and flows in census. And I think right now we're in an ebb. We're in a slow period, a prolonged slow period, but there's no indication that it's going to be a permanent fixture in the marketplace. Now, I cannot predict what's going to happen in the future, but based on our experience over the last few years, when we have seen contraction in the marketplace overall, Champaign County Nursing Home has been able to maintain a very steady private pay census. We have not seen a significant increase in our Medicaid census, and our overall census has actually increased. So based on that is the reason why we put together that financial pro forma. And again, the financial pro forma is what I call an overall strategic direction based on a Medicaid mix. There's a lot of assumptions, a lot of variables that go into daily operation or what's going on in the marketplace. So, but what it tells me when we did the analysis, again, at our current mix of 54%, we can remain financially viable. Now, MPA has always had this saying, no mission, no margin. So yes, we take Medicaid, but the reality is that we cannot take 65% or more Medicaid or 100% Medicaid. It is not financially feasible for this facility to be able to do that, or pretty much for any facility to be able to do that. So what is the right balance? So again, at 65%, Medicaid, where we're taking care of 120, 125 residents who are Medicaid, versus 54%, where we're at about 100 to 105 or so. It is less, but it allows us to maintain financial independence. And again, what we were asked to do, what MPA was asked to do, is to make sure that the nursing home live within the tax levy. And so we had to reduce our overall Medicaid mix. And we didn't do it actively, meaning we weren't turning away Medicaid. We did it by trying to focus on getting more Medicare and more private pay in the building. And we were able to get to a point where we have a Medicaid mix that is financially viable.
Mr. McGuire, you have a follow-up?
I guess in your chart, when you talk about Medicaid and going to private pay, when I look at 2015 to 2016, and it drops from $8 million in the Medicaid revenue to $6 million. Page 6, in the first baseline scenario. When you're talking about capturing more private pay, my concern is, when you go from 2015 to 2016, Medicaid revenue goes from $8 million to $6 million, and private pay goes from $3 million to $5 million. I'm not including the other numbers. And it seems pretty rosy to me, and obviously if that money doesn't show up, which I don't expect it will, there's going to be a hole in the budget. And we're talking numbers here. And you know what people say about numbers. And we've heard a lot about numbers the last couple of years, and I've never seen us stick at 175 for 3 or 4 months in a row.
Okay, Ms. Bergson and then Mr. Shore.
In the past, I understood you to say that when people ran out of money and until they were accepted by Medicare, that in that period you carried them as private pay. And then when Medicaid kicked in, you came back. So how much of this private pay is virtual private pay and how much of it is real private pay?
The private pay number that you have in the assumptions is actual private pay and not, I like that phrase, virtual private pay. So again, I know when we've talked previously, I've always talked about the private pay who are Medicaid pending, and I revised that information. And so we actually average about 70 actual private pay in any given month so far this year.
On page 17, these are actual private pay that you're showing?
Yes, for our facility, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Shore.
Here we go. All right. Just a broader demographic observation while we're talking about this. We have an aging country. We have a county that is one of the few in the state that is increasing, and the generation that is getting close to retirement and need for care, not necessarily the greatest generation at building up their savings. So definitely something to keep in mind as we, talk about long-term census numbers. I mean, not necessarily, it might be a little bit too broad for this discussion, but just thought I'd throw it out there. And I did also have a question for you as well. I had read something about Health Alliance disentangling themselves from Medicaid. Maybe now's not the time in the presentation to talk about this, but I'd love to hear what you thought about how that will impact the future here.
So what's going on with Health Alliance is that effective January 1st, they are going to no longer participate in the dual eligible managed care program, meaning our dual eligibles are the Medicare and the Medicaids. We have right now approximately 20 residents that are covered under their plan. So when they get out of the program, it does not mean those 20 residents will no longer have Medicare or Medicaid coverage. They will have two options. One will be to enroll with Molina Healthcare or to go back to traditional Medicare or Medicaid. So we won't lose those individuals, but we'll have to assist them in the transition. And I think it's a decision for them and the families, but based on the provider network, I think the majority of them will have to revert back to traditional Medicare and Medicaid coverage. And one follow-up in terms of the demographics. With the baby boomers aging, et cetera, long-term wise, there will be a continued need for long-term care services. Without question, the state and the federal government are trying to push patients and residents to the lowest level of care because it's the most cost-effective, meaning that if you can take care of someone at home, that's what they're going to do. But they're also trying to keep people out of the hospital. So there's always going to be a percentage of the seniors who are going to need nursing home care. And as the baby boomers continue to grow older, there will be a continued need for long-term care services or nursing home services. So while we see what the federal government and the state want to do, I still firmly believe that there will always be a place for a nursing home for both private pay Medicare and especially the Medicaid. So, again, I don't have the crystal ball of saying, at some point we're going to hit nadir and then maybe census will start coming up. But, across the state, across the country, overall nursing home days have declined over the last few years, but the number of overall beds in the marketplace has declined insignificantly. But will there be fallout? Potentially, yes. In Illinois, will there be fallout? Well, with what the state's doing, yeah, they may be assisting that attrition. But again, I believe that there will always be a place for nursing homes in the long-term care continuum.
Mr. Herkey.
Yeah, okay, so, looking at the numbers you presented, it feels to me like you're describing a situation where as the marketplace is shrinking, we are gaining more market share. Now, my college marketing class would recommend that we start a very aggressive advertising and marketing plan. Now, while I was recently at, I believe, a local Schnucks, I noticed on the little check writing station, there was an advertisement, a little corner panel for the Champaign County Nursing Home. So we are doing something, but perhaps now is the time to look at a new way to move forward on that. For one simple example, that I think there's some people in here who will agree with me, when the only thing people see, and I have advocates of the nursing home who say this to me as well, when the only thing they see are bad stories in the News Gazette, they don't have a lot of confidence in the nursing home, or as much as they should. I think having a responding message that highlights the success stories of the nursing home, how many people in this community, going back for 150 years almost, have benefited from it for generations at the nursing home, how folks of all walks of life have used it. And I think that that kind of a campaign would really benefit the nursing home in increasing our private pay, certainly, and possibly increasing these other numbers and reaching that goal of 206.
And in terms,
Oh, go right ahead.
I just want to follow what Mr. Harkey was saying. Without question, we have not had an active marketing endeavor or strategy. Our marketing has been focused on communication and working with the hospitals and with the health plans. Because again, we're building the relationship between them to improve medical management, nursing management, and overall care so that they can see that we are the facility to send their Medicare referrals to. And if we can get those new Medicare referrals, a percentage of those will go home, but a percentage of them will also turn into long-term private pay and also long-term Medicaid census. And that's the strategy that we've always had to improve our census. And again, based on past history, it's been a success. But I think Josh is correct that, you know, if the market is contracting, we need to take a look at more aggressive marketing, especially with the success stories. And again, we are talking over those strategies with our rehab company to pick out good Medicare cases that have gone home in 2 weeks after breaking a hip or something like that, and to just portray those positive stories more outside into the community.
Yes, Ms. Schwartz.
Well, just a quick comment. So for everybody who doesn't like 205, which I don't know if it's a good or bad number, there is a scenario with 195. So, right,
Yes.
you did, yeah, so we can look at that. I mean, I have no idea what the number should be, but we can look at 195 since you prepared it.
Well, again, it's, you know,
Page 10. So it's the same percentage Medicaid, 54%, but with an overall census of 195.
and again, based on what we had in the budget at a census of 195, without having any aggressive changes to the expenses, in general, with the same mix, with a lower mix, we are going to see poor operating performance, basically in general. So now, our break-even point historically has been at 195. So again, you can take a look, again, and what I'm looking at is not at the very bottom, cash flow after debt service and capital, but take a look at cash flow from operations. Now, I'm not ignoring the fact that we have capital issues, but are we able to maintain a positive cash flow from operations at a census of 195? And the answer to that is basically yes, it's a break-even. This reinforces that 195 is about our break-even point. So again, in terms of the discussion of where our Medicaid mix needs to be, part of the questions that came up at the Board of Directors is, in theory, if we wanted to fully fund our depreciation, and I translate that to mean, okay, that means we want to have a positive cash flow of about $700,000. If you go to page 9, a payer mix, a Medicaid payer mix of 45% is where we would need to be. But again, keep in mind, we have kept the variables to a minimum. If we're able to increase our Medicare from the budget of 16 to 20 or 25, that has a substantial positive impact. Gary, I shouldn't say we, because Gary came up with this number, and this is very conservative. For every Medicare, we're adding about, what, 100,000? If we use $350 per day. Our average Medicare revenue is about $450 per day. If we assume our cost for our Medicare is about 100, our net is about 350. Each additional Medicare will contribute at least $100,000 a year in profit. So again, that's everyone's strategy. Every nursing home is trying to build their Medicare. And again, if you take a look at the market analysis, you go to page 20 or 21, our Medicare market share was almost 20% in 2009, fell to 8% in 2011. We're back up to 15.6% in 2014. And over the, 2014 was a very good year for our Medicare. This year, we've been struggling because of the activity or the lack of activity in the hospital. But, as of today, our Medicare is now up to 17. And Medicare changes on a daily basis. So again, with all the strategic issues that we are implementing, like renovating Unit 4, and we are planning on opening that up on November 1st, that is our attempt to improve our Medicare position in the marketplace. But it's not just bricks and mortar. The relationship with the hospitals, working with Carl and Presence. We're working with Carl to try to improve our medical management. That means having a better, more effective presence of the doctors and the nurse practitioners in the building. Also getting them to help us with our nursing care, nursing skills, and CNA skills. If we can all do that and the hospitals see that we're doing that, they will be more comfortable in sending us those Medicare referrals. And again, we're doing the same thing. Well, with Health Alliance, we won't have to do it much more, but we have been in communication and working with Molina. The other strategy, for example, is our outpatient rehab program. We started looking into that and it opened it up because of the feedback from the VA and from Molina and Health Alliance saying that it would be great for you to have an outpatient therapy program for the adult daycare program. And again, our adult daycare program has seen the best census that we've ever had since we'd opened up in the new building. Our outpatient therapy is averaging about 4 or 5 residents since it's opened. And another strategy there is, while the hospitals, Medicare Advantage plans, and Molina are trying to get our Medicare length of stay as low as possible, what we can now offer is when they go home, they can continue to receive outpatient physical therapy from the same therapists that were treating them in the nursing home. And continuity of care is a big deal with these, what we call transitions of care. So if we have that in place, I think we build up our ability to work more closely with these health plans and get our Medicare census up.
Mr. McGuire next. Mr. Maxwell hasn't spoken yet. And then, Mr. Anderson, do you have yours up? And then Mr. McGuire.
Obviously, everybody's interested in the Medicare reimbursement rates and is actively, aggressively trying to recruit those kind of patients. What's your expectation that the federal government will continue to reimburse at these high rates? Thank you.
In general, the feds don't want to keep paying us at those high rates, and that's been going on every year for as far back as I can remember. What you're seeing with the Affordable Care Act is a lot of demonstration programs that Medicare has. The Dual Eligible Managed Care Program is technically a demonstration program where the federal government is moving from traditional Medicare payments to bundled payments, where a healthcare entity will be paid one rate for all the services for a broken hip. And so you see hospitals working together with the physicians in long-term care facilities, and we would contract with the hospitals. And so we're seeing those types of hybrid reimbursement methodologies. But the overall goal is to reduce Medicare expenditures. So again, the strategy is the same that I've already discussed. Building a better relationship with the hospitals and the health insurance plan so that we are participating in those endeavors. And so if our overall length of stay decreases, we have to make it up with more volume. That's basically the game that's been played.
Mr. Anderson, then Mr. McGuire, and then Mr. Shore.
Thank you. Taking a higher level look at this, let me ask you this. As I understand it, you're about breaking even. I mean, we could argue both ways. I mean, it's not as good as we'd like it to be. And as you pointed out, there were 6 others or 5 other nursing homes that are considered competition in the greater community. Now, they're either profit or nonprofit, and they're not receiving tax dollars. So they have to make their nut, so to speak, at the end of the year, or, eventually they'll have to fold. Where in our situation, as I understand it, not in the budget here, but correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't have the individual budget items, but not in here is the building bond. I think that's 1.4 million. That's paid annually. And then the operating subsidy, which is about 1.2 million. Both of those amounts are a total of 2.6 million coming from the taxpayers to help keep the nursing home afloat. Is that correct?
Well, if you take a look on let's just go to scenario 1, the baseline, page 6.
I'm there.
Okay, so under net non-operating income.
Okay, is that the operating subsidy?
Correct.
Okay, but not the building one. Okay, so we're at 1.4 million. I guess my question, just from a higher level, is we're losing we're not losing. Our competition is paying all their bills, so to speak. And I'm not saying you're not paying the bills. What I'm saying is you're being assisted by not having to pay rent or pay a mortgage. That's being taken care of by the taxpayers. Plus this amount is also coming in, the 1.2 million, which helps you balance the books at the end of the year. Intuitively, what are we doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? Because nobody else could stay in business this way. I look at how we're doing well in market shares against the competition and different payer areas. But at the end of the day, taking those two things out, we'd be 2 points, if we were an independent business, not overseen by the government or governmental entity, we'd have been bankrupt a long time ago. So what are we doing that's not making us competitive? Where's the inefficiencies? That's my question, from a higher level. I don't need to get into minutia, but from a higher level, what's killing us?
Higher level or minutia, one inefficiency is we have to pay IMRF. We have no options. If you take a look at all the other facilities, they basically pay minimal, if basically zero, retirement benefits. And that's hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional expenses that we have no option as a nursing home. So health insurance in general is more robust with the county nursing home, and those expenses are much higher. And again, you can take a look at, and we've compared cost report data with the other facilities, and it bears out that those expenses are much higher in county nursing homes than they are in non-county nursing homes.
So let's call those two together 400,000, 500,000. Where's the other 2 million going? Why are we not efficient at the other 2 million?
Well, we're taking Medicaid. We are a 245-bed facility. We are taking anywhere from 100 to 110 Medicaid. And if you take a look at the other facilities in the marketplace, take a look at what Heartland is doing. No one else is we have a 30% Medicaid market share. So the additional assistance gives the county home the flexibility to take the Medicaid when other facilities may not.
But that's the market share of all Medicaid eligible residents county in all these facilities.
Correct.
So, I'm sorry, I'm just working this through, that I would want to look at, what percentage of Medicaid are we again? Actually, in our facility? 'Cause we're
Our
not-
mix, our payer mix is about 54%. So, again,
It's
take a
almost to the
look on
break-
page 27.
Yeah,
So we were
so-
at 51%, and, I mean, we're anywhere from 54, 55% on average going back all those years.
Helena has something much higher than, Heritage, but
But again, those are much smaller facilities. So if you take a look at the market share,
no, I understand.
they have a smaller market share. So
So we're just what you're saying is, aside from the healthcare and retirement, the rest is pretty much made up by the differential on, well, what we lose taking in Medicaid, our cost? Assuming that our payer mix is higher than the rest, and
well, and you also have the debt service payment that the nursing home started taking on, I can't remember
Right,
what year
right.
it was. So again, that's another $300,000 that we absorbed, and we're able to maintain. And again, we have always been able to continually generate positive cash flow. And again, we were asked to live within the tax levy. And the nursing home has never had to ask the county for a dime or a penny above the tax subsidy. So would have been,
all right, thank you.
Okay, Jack, did you have any more questions? All right, Mr. McGuire and then Mr. Shore. And then Ms. Bergson.
I'm going to ask a quick question just to clarify something on the documents. Because I was talking to, if I can find the page. Let's say on scenario 5 on page 10. We've got 6 columns. The first one says annual change. What is that information? The whole column.
it's the census assumptions that we have for each of the scenarios, which is we're increasing our Medicare census by 1, and we're decreasing our private pay by 1 in each subsequent year. Medicaid and all the other hospice, insurance, VA, those census do not change in any of the scenarios.
That's 2015. So if I go down and look at expenses, if I look at the expenses for 2015, the environmental services are $1,085,000.
Correct?
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So they go up to $1,446,000 in 2020?
Correct?
Isn't that a pretty good sized jump? And I
Well,
mean,
I don't have-
laundry goes up to 282,000. That's almost 50%. And my question is the increase in expenses. Food service goes from 700,000 to 1.5 million. Were you not including this information? You were just looking at censuses? I mean, that's almost double. Am I looking at?
I think there's a disconnect between, 2016 and on, you just have your percentage assumptions. There is some disconnect between 2015 and 2016.
Correct.
I don't know what the disconnect is, but even the property taxes are jumping.
Well,
and
the
that doesn't make
disconnect is,
sense.
it's, the 2016 is based on the budget. And again, we've had this discussion, it's not, I have been doing the budget based on every actual dollar in 2015. So if,
I thought this was supposed to be a 5-year plan of expenses and because agency nurses are an expense, and that's a major driver in the census and what happens in the nursing home. Food costs are an expense, and what happens in food service has a major impact on the census. And when I see these increasing costs and the differences in census, it's just not good information again.
The food service doubles from 2015 to 2016. I don't think you really mean that. So there is a disconnect, and I'm not sure what it is.
Once you get to 16, you're constant going across because your census stays the same, so you're fine. Debating why is this so different, depicting on 15 in comparison, so. Especially that now. census this year, and 16 is based on 195.
Well, the basic difference is going to be that the budget was based on a census of 206. 2015, our average year-to-date is about 195, I think, when we were doing the analysis. So right there, you're going to have a difference in the projected expenses based on a census of 206.
But you're not going to double the food costs.
Well, I'd have to take a look to see what
Yeah, I think something
specifics
is
going on
off.
with that.
I mean,
But again, you know, what this analysis is, the goal of this is to give you the sensitivity analysis of what happens with the change in Medicaid mix. That was the main goal. I mean, without question, we can go into the details of all the assumptions that I put in here. But what this tells you is, gives you a framework of where the Medicaid mix needs to be, everything else being constant, which is where we are right now at 54% is a good position to be in. If our Medicaid would increase to 65%, we would have financial difficulties. And if you wanted this operation to really churn out cash, we would have to get our Medicaid mix down to 45%, or to get our Medicare to 35, 40, or 50. Then we wouldn't have any cash issues. But a Medicare census of 50 is absolutely unrealistic. So, but this gives you a framework for where we should be. And again, based on the history of the operations since 2008, we've been able to maintain financial viability with the facility. So I'm not sure what's going on with food service, or I'm sorry, with food service. And I think it could be, hang on. So I'm going to say,
Scott, there's a big swing in Alzheimer's and related disorders that, if you look at that in food service, I don't know if the changes you're making right now have an impact there, but.
well, I'm going to,
No, property tax, what Scott is showing is what the actual tax levy is from 2016 through 2020. And the tax anticipation warrants are for 85% of that, which is what I believe he's showing in 2015. It's lower. The property tax is actually higher than what is reflected here.
so if you, I just want to point out, so I think on page 10, where we're looking at food service, that is, for some reason, we've got a bad number there, because if you go to page 9 and the other scenarios, food service in 2015 is 1.4 million. Now, with Alzheimer's and related disorders, I can tell you the reason why it declined significantly in 2016 is because when we had previously done the budget, I was specifically basing the salaries in Alzheimer's based on the actual staffing in the Alzheimer's. But we've had a problem with Cronus in actually recording individuals who are working in Alzheimer's, because we have a lot of staff that move from unit to unit. And so in 2016, when I did the budget, I said, you know, I want it to reflect more of the reality of what we're actually expensing every month or on an annual basis. And that's the reason why those numbers are down. And if you take a look at nursing numbers are up. So if you would break out the salaries between nursing services, which would be units 1, 2, 3, and 5, and Alzheimer's, I'm sorry, nursing would be units 1, 2, 3, Alzheimer's would be units 4 and 5, you would have, I think, a more seamless number change from year to year in the performance. But again, getting back to page 10, I think for some reason the food service number didn't flow through in that spreadsheet for whatever reason. Yeah, because if you take a look at scenarios 1, 2, and 3, the food service in 2015 is 1.4 million.
Mr. McGuire lost his place in line, so Mr. Shore and then Ms. Schwartz.
Just to kind of go to the inverse of Mr. Maxwell's question, is there any chance of the cavalry coming in and getting some increase in the Medicaid rate? I know that's something that some people in the developmental disabilities world are working on their end.
An increase in Medicaid rates? No.
Probably not.
No. And actually, the budget includes a 5% Medicaid rate cut, and that rate cut remains in place for all years in this financial pro forma. So again, we have no idea what kind of rate we're going to see for this fiscal year, but everyone says it's going to be a rate cut. So now, unfortunately, no, we won't get the inverse.
Okay, Ms. Schwartz and then Mr. McGuire. Are you going to let Mr. McGuire go? Okay. Oh, I thought you had your, oh, sorry, Ms. Schwartz.
So back to your point that what we wanted to see is sensitivity analysis of Medicaid mix. Do you need a direction from the county board at some point? Even though you said it somehow magically worked itself to be to a break-even point, but do you need any directions to say, because when people before were talking about putting a referendum question of selling, I don't think anybody's kidding themselves that there will be Medicaid residents at 50% after you sell.
You know,
So
I would,
before we go to getting rid of all the Medicaid by selling, do you need some, let's make sure we can sustain it, and that means a maximum rate of whatever you tell us?
you know, at this point, because if you take a look at that Medicaid cost report analysis, we're not seeing an overall increase in our Medicare census or market share. You know, I'd say no. I mean, we've never had to actively manage that mix, and I don't see any reason that we're going to need to do that in the short term over the next, couple of years. Now, that may change, but I really don't see any indication that we're going to have a big push to take on more Medicaid.
Please continue.
So I don't know if that's the right time to address it or not, but because we're worried about Medicaid payments stopping, are we going to talk about it at some point tonight, or do you want to leave it to a later point? So it's one thing about when Medicaid comes in low and has to be balanced by Medicare and private pay and subsidies, and it's another one when it doesn't come at all, right?
So that's a good segue if there are no more questions on the 5-year projection, because yes, I'm prepared to talk about the cash flow and the payment delay issues.
Okay, yeah, Mr. McGuire, and then I've saved mine to the end, but go ahead, Mr. McGuire.
Well, I guess Josh, before he left, asked a question and made some comments about some of the things that they're doing with staff to try to improve the operation. And then we had an MOU about weekend work. I wondered if those positions were filled so that we could maybe improve the service at the nursing home, because that would impact the census and improve the budget before we start talking about more money. I mean, because I think the operation of the nursing home is what's important, and that it become viable that way, and we improve the budget that way. Can you answer some of those questions and the impact of a better operation and better management of the nursing home?
So we had talked to the union about putting together 12-hour shifts on the weekends. They are currently working for the nurses to actually implement 12-hour shift 7 days a week. So for the nurses. So again, if that's the case, we will. The benefit to that is instead of having 3 nurses to cover a 24-hour shift, we just need 2 nurses. So we're able to spread out our staffing. So that will help us. So again, the union is going to be voting on that and to see if the nurses would agree to do that. We have an orientation class, I think, that starts tomorrow. We have 15 new hires. I don't have the exact numbers, but the majority of them are CNAs. And then food service workers. I think we also may have a cook in there. So again, those are our two biggest needs. I can tell you that one of the other facilities in the marketplace has just laid off a number of their staff, and that's the reason why we have a huge influx of new hires over the last couple of weeks. And I think we got another orientation class coming up in a couple of weeks. So if we can get our staffing numbers up, we'll be able to reduce our agency significantly. So again, we're also working on retention and reducing our turnover by improving our orientation process. I think that's something we had talked about, or I had presented before in a quarterly update. So we are making a very concerted effort to hire, retain, and maintain our own staff so we can get rid of agency or reduce it as much as possible.
Sorry, Ms. Bergson?
We've spent so many lovely evenings together discussing Medicare, Medicaid mix. Does anyone know the theory of the government behind paying so much more than the cost for Medicare and less than the cost for Medicaid? I mean, it's an artificial problem that they create that way.
Well, Medicare has always been a short-term care. So again, you have Medicare will cover up to 100 days with a qualifying hospital stay. So it's a short term. And again, I think our average Medicare length of stay is 30 days or less. Medicare Advantage is probably 14 days. Medicaid is for residents who need long-term or permanent care within the facility. So again, with Medicare, the argument has always been a lot more intensive services. So for example, someone who just broke their hip or is recovering from pneumonia needs a very aggressive rehab program to get them back to where they were prior to becoming debilitated. And, you know, in many cases, we try to send them home, but in other cases, they'll become a permanent resident. That's the reason why there's a big difference in the reimbursement. But again, as Mr. Maxwell had brought up, you know, the federal government thinks that they're paying the nursing homes way too much for Medicare. But the reality is that the Medicare does offset what Medicaid does not cover. And again, our Medicaid rate averages right about $150 per day. Our costs average about $200 per day. And even me as a non-accountant can figure out that math really quickly.
Mr. Maxwell, were you preparing to raise your hand? No. Okay. All right, I have a series of clarification questions, if I might. And a suggestion first on the chart. Well, let's see. I have the earlier version, so let me just double check. Okay, on page 11, for me personally, I'm only speaking for me, but on that chart, it would have been so helpful so I would have a better understanding of all the data that follows, is what percentage, I would have added 3 columns, what percentage in these homes is dedicated to Medicare, Medicaid, and private pay. Because most of the data that's here doesn't tell the story, since I don't have those pieces of information. Second, before I make my next comments, I want to know if the information on page 11 through 14 is the same as in the earlier version. Were there any changes on those numbers?
No.
Okay, then I can safely make some comments. As I read those numbers and looked at the projected number of 206 in the home, I'm having trouble having the reality check that 206 has reliability. And so some of the stories and case studies that have been laid out for us probably are not, even accepting that I know there are a lot of assumptions, but that assumption I really question, because there's so much variability and flexibility going on. And to reflect on the demographic statement of Mr. Shore, and the argument you've made that there will be a need for nursing homes, there's also going to be a change because of managed care and all of the things that are happening in healthcare toward policy of aging in place, and that's going to change the game plan tremendously. And I don't see, well, you didn't talk about policy, but that's something else that I think makes the number of 206 questionable. And then I have information question on some of the things included in expenses. I just take any page because the list is always the same. I thought respiratory therapy was not being offered at the nursing home. I thought that failed to become a robust offering at the nursing home. Did I misunderstand?
Yes, we do have respiratory therapy.
Oh, you do?
And we are currently negotiating with Christie.
Oh, Ms. Busey just reminded me that I'm thinking of pulmonary, so sorry for that question. I apologize for that.
But we also are in negotiations with Christie Clinic to secure the services of a pulmonologist so we can actually implement the pulmonary rehab program that we've been talking about.
All right. And is there any inclusion in your the 5 scenarios that you provided for us of the income that is expected with the renovation of those rooms, or is that not included? Because that would take a lot of assumptions to generate some numbers on that.
Well, again, if you take a look at the Medicare assumptions, which is a census of 16, I would say that that's conservative. We have 22 beds that we'll have available, not including every bed in the building. Just about every bed in the building is duly certified for Medicare and Medicaid. So with the other 200 beds we have available for Medicare as well, I think a Medicare target of 16 is very, very achievable. And again, our Medicare census today is at 16. And again, Medicare fluctuates pretty dramatically from day to day, from week to week.
I understand that, yes. Okay, and then I have a last comment of somebody who had a mother in a nursing home for 10 years, and I can't speak for the negotiations with the union, but I'm quite concerned to hear that there's a conversation for 12-hour shifts, because research does show that there is a correlation and a causation between length of shifts and the number of days in a row people work for those lengthy time periods, and so that does concern me a bit. Mr. Maxwell, I see your hand now.
Thank you. I think maybe I can help further segue and answer my questions at the same time. We've not talked about standards of care here tonight, and I'm sense that we probably ought to at some point in time, but we're going to run out of time this evening. And that concerns me. With the 2 functions I see a county-owned nursing home ought to have. We ought to set the standard of care for the community, and we ought to take care of the poor. And it's apparent that we can only take care of poor at about 50% or maybe 55% at the maximum on Medicaid. So again, we right now are fortunate that we're taking care of the Medicaid about what's coming in the door. But at some point in time, we'll probably have to make the tough decision, maybe 1 or 2 years down the road, on whether or not to limit it. Quite frankly, I'm not in favor of doing that. I feel like that we are here for the purpose of taking care of Medicaid and the poor. That's just my personal opinion. The other thing I've noticed is that the budgeted costs actually are closer to $226 a day rather than the $203.90 that's shown on page 5. And I've been concerned about that differential for some time. Apparently, we're coming under budget every year, apparently, but if you look at the FY16 budget and divide that by 206, you're coming out around 200, and divide that by 365, you're coming out around $226 a day budgeted. The other thing that I'm concerned about is that, again, on page 5, we're showing that we have a Medicaid rate of actually $135.45. We also get a intergovernmental transfer add-on. I believe that's a state payment for county nursing homes. Maybe you can help me with it. Quite frankly, we're not getting paid that much. And when you look at our accounts payable last month, it was $5.2 or $3 million. I suspect a lot of that is probably up to $1 million, $1.5 million of that's intergovernmental transfer, and quite frankly, I doubt if we're ever going to see that. Now, going forward after the budget issue is resolved, I think probably we'll see some additional money coming. But I think my own feeling is the state's going to look at this and say, you made it up to this point, we haven't got the money, so we'll take care of you from this point going forward. And we're probably going to have to eat that 1.2 or $3 or $4 million that is represented by the IGT. So that maybe helps everybody segue into the next part of the conversation. So thank you.
So I want to respond to Mr. Maxwell's comments about the IGT. So the Intergovernmental Transfer Agreement is an agreement between the nursing home, the federal government, and the states. So the IGT add-on is actually a percentage of the federal contribution to our Medicaid rates. And so it's really not something that the state, because we have the IGT program in place, can retroactively decide not to pay us. So the outstanding amounts that are paid, that are still owed to us, is because the state has not done a reconciliation of our IGT payments over the last couple of years. Basically, what they determine an anticipated IGT rate, and then when they get the cost reports, they will reconcile against the cost reports. And in discussions that we've had with the state, they are behind in doing that reconciliation. And we have taken a look at our numbers compared to DeKalb County Nursing Home and our other county nursing homes, and they bear out that the numbers are, as we calculated, are correct. So, but the state is behind in doing the reconciliation. So at this point, we believe that the numbers are good. Now, would it be unprecedented for the state to renege on it? Yes, but they've never done that in the past. And that, again, that's the only thing that we can go on. We have an IGT agreement in place. They have always paid and have honored the IGT agreement that has been in place. So that's all I can go on. Any?
Sure.
Just
Ms.
for the-
Schwartz?
I think the $223 that you're getting is you're taking all the expenses and dividing by the average census. But when you talk about rehab, for the most part, this is Medicare, not all, but for the most part, this is Medicare. So I think when Scott was giving you 203, that's a Medicaid cost.
You are correct.
So I think that's a differential, because if you're looking at what the rehab, the physical therapy, occupational speech therapy, you're roughly around $900,000, and I agree some of them go to Medicaid patients, but most of it Medicare. So you need to take these out, and then, so that's where your $20 a day difference.
Mr. Maxwell is correct. So I think the overall cost is probably about $220 per day. But when and again, this is an error on my part, because when I compare the Medicaid costs, I'm comparing it to how the Medicaid cost report calculates our costs, because Medicaid does not recognize 100% of our costs in the cost report. They take out a fair amount, and so that's why our average on the Medicaid cost report is $200 per day, and I think Medicare or some of the related costs are pulled out. So, and when you do the comparison from state to state, where Illinois is the lowest paid Medicaid rate across the country, it's based on the average Medicaid rate, the non-IGT rate, with the average Medicaid cost for those facilities. And again, state of Illinois has the largest differential between reimbursement and costs. We're either 49th or 50th, one of those two.
It looks like we don't have any more questions right at the moment, so why don't you segue into part 2 of your presentation?
Help me pass these out here. It's 2 pages, so there's 3 months.
Just
Ms.
to fill the-
Schwartz, do you want to
just to fill the time, yeah. well-
Yeah, fill the void.
Well, I think whether it's a 223 day or 203, I think the bottom line is, even when Medicaid does get paid, we're talking about $50 a day that we don't get reimbursed for a Medicaid resident, and that's the bottom line. And so either it gets subsidized by Medicare and private pay, or it gets subsidized by the taxpayer, which is right now a combination, or it gets capped, but those are the choices. So I think sometimes it might be easier to narrow it down to that number and say, here's how much you need to subsidize, instead of talking about all of them. So I think that's a good number to remember.
That was a good point, Ms. Schwartz. Thank you very much. Does everybody have your copy so you can follow the bouncing ball? All right.
This one is going to be we've been really trying to find a way how to succinctly talk about the cash flow issues with the state. So please bear with me and interrupt as necessary. So everyone knows that the state does not have a budget. The current situation that we're dealing with is there is a high probability that we will see a Medicaid payment delay with or without a budget in place.
Mr. McGuire, already a question. Good.
Sure. What gives you the impression that there's a high probability? I mean, if Medicaid is a federal program, and it's
So let me give you some numbers. At the end of the state's fiscal year 2015, they had $4.4 billion in unpaid bills. Right now, for fiscal year 2016, the comptroller is saying that they have a projected shortfall of $2.3 billion just for the spending under the court orders or the consent decrees that are in place. And a couple of the consent decrees are for paying Medicaid providers. The first are for the developmentally disabled providers, and then the second court decree or consent decree was for all the other Medicaid providers in the state. So that doesn't include, there's an additional $4.2 billion in spending that is on hold or not being paid due to the budget impasse. So the good thing is, because of those consent decrees, we are actually being paid within 30 days. And we just received our latest Medicaid payment last week? Yesterday. So that's good, because in the past, we have been 60 to 90 days behind in getting paid, and they're actually paying us on time, which is great. But because the state or the comptroller is projecting that they're not going to have enough cash to continue to pay all the bills, at some point, there's going to have to be a slowdown. And again, no one, and trust me, I've been making a lot of phone calls and talking to a lot of individuals with our associations, with the comptroller, with our lobbyists, of when this is going to occur. And no one can tell. And basically, the comptroller, I think, on a daily or weekly basis is saying, okay, I've got $1 to pay $4 or $5 worth of bills. And that's what's going on in Springfield. So the other unknown question or unknown answer is, how long will a payment delay be? The conventional wisdom, and again, trust me, this is not any method to the madness, but what I keep hearing is the general thought that we could see a 6-month payment delay. Could it be less? Yes. Could it be more? Possibly. But The conventional thinking from the associations and everyone else is maybe a 6-month payment delay. But again, that is pure speculation. So again, to recap, yes, there will probably be a payment delay. When it will occur, we don't know. So whether it happens later this year or early in 2016 or later in 2016, I really don't know. And if anyone else has any more information about this, I'm happy to hear it. But it tells me that we have to get prepared for dealing with a payment delay. Again, the last time we had a payment delay was in 2011, and we had a 6-month payment delay. On top of that, it was a trying situation because the state was very slow in reestablishing a new intergovernmental transfer agreement. So we were not paid back then 2 years' worth of IGT payments, plus the 6-month payment delay. And that resulted, we didn't have to issue RANs, but we were investigating and we had revenue anticipation notes documents ready, but we never had to issue RANs. But we did make it during that time because we had some vendors that allowed us to hold off paying them up to 12 months. We did pay interest, and one of them was our rehab vendor, allowed us to hold off payments equal to a 12-month period. That was, I forget, how much was that?
Oh, that one vendor was over $1 million.
Yeah, that was over $1 million just for that one vendor. So,
Scott, half a second. Mr. Carter has a question for you. And Mr. Carter, be sure to turn on your microphone, please. Thank you.
My question is, how much the state actually owe now? Toll money.
Medicaid owes us $1 million. And as Mr. Maxwell said, the IGT is about $1.2, $1.3 million.
1.2 million.
So about, between the IGT and Medicaid, it's about $2.2 million. And again, on a monthly basis, Medicaid cash flow is about $350,000 a month. So.
There's another question for you. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I thought you were done. My apologies.
Okay. No harm done. Now, you say you got a check yesterday? So now how much money we have on hand?
Do you know what current cash balance is?
I mean, we have liabilities on hand too, but probably 400,000, 500,000.
Roughly 400, 500,000.
500?
About 400 or $500,000.
That's it.
Okay, Mr. McGuire.
Okay, I guess go back to my original question. So the federal dollars that are passing through the state budget seem like they would pass on through. Now, that hasn't meant anything for our motor fuel tax money either, but, and they would continue to pass through the federal government, still passing this money through no matter what the budget is. I'm sure they're telling you something different from the groups that are representing you. So I'm not sure why they would still change, although I'm sure that the state government would like to take the federal dollars, even though they're in a different fund, and use them for whatever else they want to spend them on. But I'm not sure that that's possible. But I don't know the answer to that question. And maybe they're just not paying. The federal government isn't paying the dollars. In January, the voting numbers will change in the legislature from a super majority to a regular majority. And also, I'd like to know the ITG money is $1.2 million. The $1 million that were owed, is that just for the general census population, or are these for applications that weren't filed correctly, or are they? What's the makeup of that $1 million?
The $1 million includes current residents that are covered by Medicaid, plus recently approved applications for which we have yet to be paid. In regards to how the federal matching dollars work, what I've been told is that the matching dollars are not paid to the state until the providers are paid. So if we're paid $100 per day, the federal match is $50 or 50%. So the state doesn't get the $50 until they show that they've paid us the $100, and then the feds will immediately reimburse the state for their 50%.
So in other words.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So in other words, we might get the federal part, we're never going to get the state part. I mean, after it's paid, but then the state isn't paying it.
No, if the state delays a payment to us, they're not going to receive a federal match because they haven't paid us yet. The federal match will not be paid to the state until the state pays the provider their Medicaid rates. So the matching dollars are not continuing to flow into the state for them to use anywhere they can. Again, that's what I've been told on more than one occasion. Do I have proof of that? No, but that's not what I've been told the process works.
Okay, please continue.
So the county, because we are a county entity, we cannot just go to the bank, get a line of credit or loan for the Medicaid receivables. And that is what all the other providers are doing. They have lines of credit to be able to handle a Medicaid payment delay, basically borrowing against the Medicaid receivables. The only option that we have are the revenue anticipation notes. So, I mean, they're actual bonds. We have to put together bond documents, use bond counsel. That is our only option to get cash based on our Medicaid receivables. The second option that we have is a political solution. And again, I think I've brought this up on more than one occasion. We are currently trying to get a meeting with the Illinois Comptroller to see if there's any way that we can get, if there's a payment delay in place, and this is specifically for Champaign County Nursing Home. It is not for all the county nursing homes. But can the comptroller agree to pay X percent of our average Medicaid cash receipts on a monthly basis? Obviously, it would be nice if the comptroller would pay us 100% of our monthly receivables, but in reality, we probably have to ask for something or get something less. But if there's any regular payments that we can get, I'm going to take it. But in doing the math, anything less than 70% of our regular receivables will end up requiring us to still have to issue revenue anticipation notes. Now, the stipulations with the revenue anticipation notes, we can only borrow 85 cents on the dollar. We will have to have some form of receivables from the state. And typically what we were going to use in the past is what's called a prepayment report. It's a report that's generated by the state that says basically what we're going to get paid for that month. So in talking with bond counsel, the way we believe that the revenue anticipation notes will work is that we will issue RANs in 2-month increments. So we would have to get 2 prepayment reports, and then we could go to a lending institution to have them buy the revenue anticipation notes. The big question that we don't have the answer to is, will any lending institution be interested in buying these revenue anticipation notes? So we would like, and I'm not asking for this tonight because it's a study session, but I believe we need to start shopping these around before it becomes an urgent need. And we do have some little flexibility. So we did, and what you have in front of you is 2 scenarios. One is a 3-month payment delay, and the second is a 6-month payment delay. In both of those cases...
Scott, just half a second. Ms. Michaels has a question.
I'm sorry, back to what you were talking about, the people borrowing and the revenue anticipation. And as you know, I've said many times, I'm not in favor of that at all. But what I am asking is your statement about other people going out and borrowing and whatnot like that. are there county nursing homes? I understand that individual private nursing homes already have operating expenses and things like that because they have their buildings and whatnot that they use generally when they go to their lender, their commercial, wherever they do. But what we're talking about is an entity where we have the people's money that we're dealing with, not just necessarily a private corporation's money. And so what I would be most interested in what other nursing homes that are in the situation we are, county-owned, that are potentially looking at this.
In talking with some of the other county nursing homes, there's an agreement. The revenue anticipation notes are the only financing vehicle that we have. And again, it is borrowing against the Medicaid receivables. And what we're looking at is using the receivables as the full collateral. And in 2011, we were looking at two options. One with the county backing the revenue anticipation notes and the county not backing the revenue anticipation notes. Now, in theory, if the county is backing them or guarantee it, will they be more marketable? Probably, but that's...
That's not what I'm asking. I understand what you're talking. I understand the revenue.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Situation. What I'm asking about is other county nursing homes, other people that are not private that are looking for loans. I mean, there aren't that many county-owned nursing homes anymore, and how many of them are in the same situation that we are in, not necessarily being 3 or 6 months behind, but looking where that might be the only option available, or do they have other things that have been in place that have kind of set them up to weather some of this storm where we have not?
And the answer to that is no. Again, I have not talked with all the county homes, but in talking with leading age associations, the president of the County Home Nursing Association, and again, she's the administrator at Rock Island County, they've issued revenue anticipation notes back in 2011 to get them through the payment delays. So the counties are very limited. The only other option is to delay payments to vendors to conserve cash. So what you have in front of you, again, is a 3-month scenario and a 6-month scenario. In the 3-month scenario, and again, without getting into all the details, but please feel free to ask any questions, because I know there's a lot of numbers. It's in small print because we did a 12-month projection plus. Is that with the 3-month payment delay, we can actually get by without issuing a revenue anticipation note. But what we will have to do, and we would do to different degrees depending on how long the payment delay is we would have to slow down payments to some of our vendors. So in the 3-month payment delay, we anticipate that we would have to conserve about $435,000 in cash. And we would do that by delaying payments to selected vendors by probably a maximum of 6 months. So right now, we're about 60 days in normal turnaround for paying our vendors. And we think anywhere from 120 days to 6 months is the maximum where we would need to be able to conserve $435,000 in the 3-month payment delay. And if we do that, and if those vendors would agree to that delay, we can get by with a 3-month payment delay without having to issue revenue anticipation notes. And it would not require any operational cuts whatsoever. It would be business as usual from a day-to-day standpoint. If there's a 6-month payment delay, we would need to issue revenue anticipation notes. And again, with the assumption that we would do it in batches of 2 months of receivables, we would issue a total of 8 separate revenue anticipation notes. We would have to conserve, at the same time, we would also still have to conserve cash to make it work. And we estimate on our cash flow analysis $660,000 in savings due to delays in paying our vendors. And again, we don't anticipate having to exceed a 6-month payment delay for these selected vendors. And we also have the option of paying down the vendors or getting them caught up a little bit by the end of the year. But then if it goes on into the next year, we would have to delay payments again. But the moral to the story is that we can weather a payment delay with the revenue anticipation notes without having to impact operations whatsoever. So even under the 6-month payment delay, we would not have to cut any services, any personnel whatsoever.
I'm sorry, Ms. Michaels, please go
Sorry,
ahead.
you guys could get tired of me, I know. Okay, if I follow you here with your scenario on your 3-month, you said the total for the 3 months is you're going to be about 435,000 short? Is that what you said? That's for
Yes.
all 3 months, correct?
To weather a 3-month payment delay, and the state would not, so in month 4, the state would start making regular monthly payments.
Right, but
Correct.
what you said was you would be 435,000 short.
We would have to,
But I'm looking at the top and the budget's like 250 a month. So I'm trying to figure out how much dollar amount that would be needed.
so if you, where we have the projected cash savings that we have to have, if you go down where it says delay / pay, in parentheses, non-labor expenses.
Hold on, oh, I got you.
So it's right above where it's in bold print, ending cash balance adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see in January, and again, we're just assuming that the payment delay starts in January.
Mhm.
There's no reason for January, it's just an arbitrary start date. In March, we would have to conserve $80,000. In April, another 145, and in May, another 145, and in September, 65.
Okay. I guess in a simple form, I was just looking straight away at the top on the cash deposits, receiving nothing February, March, and April. That's what I was looking at.
Right, and that's the
And
3-month payment
then
delay.
you were looking at the 435. So your 435 number is coming from the 290 plus the 80 plus the 65 in September? Sorry, my voice. Apologize.
Yes, that is correct. And then in December, and I know it didn't come through in the copy, we actually showing that we're making a
That's the
catch-up payment.
435.
Right.
Okay, you're right, I didn't see that. And then if I can, ma'am, the 6 months, same thing. What is the total dollar amount there that we're looking at?
So the total amount would be $660,000. So again,
Okay.
the same line,
And that line is showing 240, if I read that correctly, on the print here.
so you've got 80,000 in March, 145 in April, another 145 in June, 145 in August, 145 in October, and then we would make some catch-up payments in
So
November
add
and
the
December.
290 and the 240 that we're supposed to be able to read on that line for November and December.
Yeah, no, you leave those out, and
Well, then what would be the total number for the 6-month delay?
right,
If
so
you've got 435 on the 3-month, it's not 870, it's some other number here, I think, because you probably have interest in things.
it should be $660,000 before the payments that are made in November and December.
Short.
Yes.
I don't see how you can be 4 here and 6 here.
So I'm reading the numbers, Ms. Schwartz, I apologize.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One is, what do you think is the interest rate you're going to have to pay your vendors when we delay payment as opposed to the revenue anticipation notes?
So.
Obviously, it's an easier one to do because you don't have to go bond counsel and all that, but
Do you know what the typical
Roughly.
interest rate is?
Last time we were looking somewhere between 3 and 5%, but we put 5 in this analysis to be conservative.
For the vendors? Not for the RANs, for the vendors, what do they charge us for interest?
10%, I'm just a rough number, I'm not.
remember?
Somewhere 8 to 12, 8 to 12.
8 to 12.
Roughly 8 to 12%.
Okay.
1% a month.
Okay, and the RANs are,
We're assuming 5%.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, okay. And then you said you can probably get through 3 months. So is there any particular reason not to wait for those 3 months and at that point say, well, let's assume it might be 6 and then start talking about these? Because if you can get through 3 anyway, I mean, my personal inclination would be to first go through rents without county backing. And
I
you
think-
also said there is political leverage you can get when you can't get rents, that if we say,
Well,
hey,
that's-
we'll cover you, it's like, sure, why would the comptroller pay you anything if Champaign County is willing to back you up? So I'm in favor of not backing you up, even though I would like the nursing home to do well.
I agree also, but I think what we'd like to do, because we want to test the market, and so in talking with the county treasurer, the feeling is that we should get county board approval for the RANs so that we can start testing the market, not actually issue any RANs. And I know there's a subtle difference, but because the treasurer wants to put together an RFP.
No, I get the rents,
Yeah.
but there is rents with and without county backing.
Yes.
I'm talking about, I mean, that's me, that's not 22 people voting, but personally, I don't mind giving you approval to go shop, but without county backing at this point. So what is the
Correct.
treasurer telling you? Or maybe,
We just don't know. I mean,
Okay.
until we start talking with the lending institutions, we won't know. Yep.
Just to add to that, we will not need county backing unless the interest rate is erroneous. The way it's set up now and the way the previous bond council and the current bond council explains it, we can borrow against the receivables and not involve the county. The problem initially, 4 years ago when this came up, is that when the RANs were written, it said that they had to be paid off within 1 year. But in fact, upon interpretation, and since time's passed and the lawyers have had a chance to look at it, they now say that once you issue a RAN and you secure it with a bank and you received your funds, then down the road, the board can come back and allow for a refunding of those, which allows the banks to hold them beyond a year. And that way, we hopefully will not need the county's backing because that requirement's not there. When they initially looked at it 4 years ago, they said, oh, well, if it's due in a year and the government's not paying, how is the home going to be able to pay it back? Well, they wouldn't be able to. And they wanted somebody to pay it back, so they looked to the county. But now, through refunding, that allows the banks to hold on to those RANs and allows it to continue. I don't think it's going to go a year. Scott said he doesn't think it's going to go 6 months. A lot of homes ran into trouble when it was at 6 months last time, 4 years ago. I can only imagine where they're going to be if it goes out a year. So with that said, we just want to be proactive. We want to be able to go to the banks, find out who's interested, explain it to them, go through it. If we wait until 3 months goes by and it takes them time to understand it, and then they have to go to their lending boards for approval, then it's going to take 2-3 more months to actually receive the funds. And then we're going to be in trouble because then we will be 6-7 months out without receiving a RAN. That's why, again, we want to be proactive. We don't want the added interest expense. We don't want to do this. Think of this in terms of, I'm sure many of you know somebody on Social Security. What happens if the government cuts off Social Security for 3 months, for 6 months? People will have to turn to their loved ones and their family for help. They would have to. Same situation here. If they stop paying our Medicaid payments of $350,000 a month, we need an alternative. And that alternative we can do on our own just through your resolution and allowing us to borrow against those receivables.
So
You
ju-
have more questions?
well, just to clarify, so you need county board approval to let you go out even if we don't back you, is that correct?
That's correct.
Which is not happening today anyway, but whenever.
Right.
And then once you get that approval and you go through the process, you can delay actually borrowing until you need it? Or do you?
Most certainly.
Yes.
Oh, that'll be the
Okay,
last
so that's
effort.
what I said about 3 months. So you could wait 3 months before you actually start borrowing.
yes.
Right, and if
Not
we,
the-
if by being proactive, if we can actually line up some banks and get this in place, not the borrowing,
Right.
just the concept and the commitments, then we can push it to the last
Until you need
minute
it. Okay.
and then say go. So you're exactly right.
Thank you.
Mr. Carter has a question. You got your microphone? Good.
Yeah. Social Security work a little bit different. They've been had my money for billions of years, and I pay every month. So I don't think they're gonna be asking us to let them pay us next month. And the last statement I got from Social Security that they was in pretty good shape. Yeah.
We were using that as an example. We're not saying that
Now,
they're going to
my
stop.
question is, you know, I heard this not too long ago, that we had to let y'all have money to keep afloat. And I was kind of hesitant then about the deal, but I went on anyway, soft-hearted, and voted for it. Now, what I'm hearing is really heartbreaking. Now I wonder how much you owe us now.
Well, as Mr. Winchell said, we would rather not have to issue revenue anticipation notes, but we have to make sure that we maintain our cash flow so that we can.
No, you're supposed to be running the joint. That's not our responsibility.
And again, that's why this option allows us to do this independently.
Well,
Obviously,
what
with
I'm
your
saying,
resolution.
wait, that's what you told us when we let you at the last loan. Now, and a loan before that, you had to even pay that up. So I'm gonna tell you, this board member don't have good. I don't have good outlet on you all. I don't. It look dim, really dim. And I'm wondering if we ever gonna get our money. Now you want money, you compounding your debt. And I don't know. Look like to me, you gonna have to figure out something that, you know, that you can have better assurance than what we want. Because this just not looking good.
Thank you, Mr. Carter, Mr. Rector, and then Mr. Anderson.
I'm slightly confused. How, if the bank, how does the bank know that those funds are going to be received X amount of months from now for them to give you the security on this note? I'm confused how, what is that term, and what's the guarantee that that revenue stream is going to come from the state to pay the bills that's the security for the note?
You want to answer that?
Mhm. Excellent question, because I talked to some of the banks 4 years ago, and that's exactly what they asked. And the assurance is that the Medicaid receivables have historically always been paid. And we have a track record, and we show them that. We show them our obligation with the state as well as our obligation with the federal government so that they see that connection. And then we use, as Scott mentioned earlier, the receivables from the government saying, we owe you this money, and that's what we use as our collateral.
I understand the collateral. I just don't know how the bank attaches a term to that, because there's no, it's not like a single pay note that's due in 1 year. That term is undetermined at that point in time, waiting on the receipt of those funds from the state. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then again, that's why we want to be proactive, and we have to get out talking to the banks to convince them that we are part of their community and they can invest in us, and those receivables are solid, and historically they have been. But you're exactly right. We can't say they'll be paid in 2 months, 6 months, 9 months. But under the revenue anticipation notes, you attach those specific receivables. So on the very first one, first dollars in goes to that bank. That's all
contractual.
Right. Oh, I understand that.
Okay.
I just don't see an end in the term, 6 months.
Well, and
1 year.
again, that's where originally, when it was written, and I mentioned this earlier, the RAN had a structure of a 1-year term. The fallacy of it is if you never received payment, how are you going to pay it back? So that's where they introduced the refunding. So the banks, for those that believe in the home and want this type of vehicle in their portfolio, they have to buy into the fact that those funds will come at some point. And historically, the longest they withheld funds were 6 months. But you're right, it's not an easy sell, and that's why we have to be proactive and get out there with the treasurer and see who we can secure.
Our argument has always been that a Medicaid receivable should be solid. It's not a budget appropriation that the state makes that they could decide next year not to pay. I mean, it's Medicaid, and I think even with the Affordable Care Act, it's made Medicaid even more solid. But we have a contractual agreement with the state and the feds to receive Medicaid payments. And I think maybe part of it is an education with the lending institutions so that they understand how Medicaid works between the state and the federal government. I mean, I don't see any scenario where the state could decide not to pay its Medicaid obligations, but we are in uncharted territory at the same time.
Again, I'm not talking about the quality of collateral. I'm just, when that payment is. And that's where I think it's going to be a hard sell to any financial institution. I loan somebody money, I want to know what's going to be paid back. Thank you.
Just a minute. Do you want to just make a quick comment to that?
Yeah, I think what they're setting is, that's why you're talking about refunding. So they can set it technically at 5 years or whatever. And the idea is as soon as the money comes in, you refund the bond. So I mean, I understand what you're saying. You can't send an indefinite bond because that's called equity, and they're not buying an equity in the home. But they're going to send an artificially long 3 year, I don't know what they're thinking, 3 years or whatever, and then they'll simply pay, that's the refunding part of that, as soon as the money comes in. So that's the deal. And last time they did it at 1 year, which was too short, but they're going to simply do it long and then refund with no penalties.
Mr. Anderson, Mr. Anderson, do you mind if Mr. Weibel goes ahead? He hasn't spoken this evening.
Thank you. I just want to point out, Mr. Carter, the problems we're having are that the state's may not be paying us money. It wouldn't matter who's managing nursing home, whether it's us, whether it's this company or anybody or you. If the state doesn't pay any money, you need money to work with. That's what we're anticipating. We think the state's not going to send us money. Okay? That's all I wanted to say.
I understand that.
Okay, Mr. Anderson.
I just have a question. I think, if I understand right, the nursing home is asking for us to pass a resolution that they can use, I guess, as an instrument of exhibition of good faith of the county, that we're recognizing they're going out borrowing money. Hopefully the state will pay and pay back, but aren't we kind of saying through this resolution, if that doesn't happen, we're here behind this? Then what's the purpose of the resolution?
Only the county board can issue these revenue anticipation notes, but they're being backed by the revenue from Medicaid, not by the county's revenues. That's what they want to take to the banks to see if they can sell the banks on that. But only the county board can issue it.
Thank you.
Okay, continue. I don't see any more clarification questions right now.
I don't have any additional information to add. I think we've.
I was wrong. Mr. Shore has a question.
It's not a question. It's just, just to double highlight and underline. I mean, these Medicaid payments are something that the courts have ordered. Like, I mean, if you're a bank, you've got to understand that's like probably the safest bet in the state right now. Those are the things that they will not be able to get out of paying at some point. Depends on the rate or the time frame again, but.
Ms. Bergson, did you? No. She's just whispering under her breath here. Okay, any other questions or clarifications since we have both of our consultants here to take advantage? Mr. McGuire, good for you.
I just wanted to clarify the weekend hours that the MOU, that you filled those positions. And I don't know that. We had the MOU that we passed.
Right, for the 12-hour shifts. The
did
staff
pass.
is actually looking at not just doing 12-hour shifts on the weekends, but doing 12-hour shifts 7 days a week.
Well, I know, but I understand that. But I'm talking about, we passed that resolution or that MOU months ago to try
Right.
to improve weekend, to fill those positions, to help get more regular staff into those weekends. I wanted to know if we have actually hired anybody to work those weekends.
No, we haven't, because again, the nurses have felt, the union leaders have felt that they wanted to actually expand it to a 7-day-a-week, 12-hour
Be careful,
option.
because I can ask them, and I have, and that's not the answer they gave me.
Ms. Bergson. Your microphone, please.
How many of these 12-hour shifts would they work a week?
Typically, it's a maximum of 3.
Any other questions? Mr. Carter, and your microphone, please.
Okay. Madam Chair, I think we done heard the questions from the managers, so now what I suggest that the board itself need to sit down and do some talking.
I think that will happen next, and we couldn't make any decisions tonight because it is a study session, and that's why it's the best time to ask.
No, I'm not saying make any, but I think, I'm just saying, I hope we have the privilege to sit down as a board and talk about some things.
Do you want to continue some conversation this evening? That's the purpose of.
Not this evening,
Not this evening, okay?
but at another date.
All right. I will. Mr. Maxwell.
In order to move this along, and I realize anything we do tonight will not have the weight of rule behind it, but would it be appropriate to get some sort of a sense of the board members that are still remaining about issuing RANs, trying for that without the backing of the corporate fund? I think that would be what I would like to see happen. At least try to see if it's available without the backing of the corporate fund, just a show of hands.
Certainly, we can do that. A show of hands from those who would favor proceeding as has been recommended this evening. All right, those opposed?
I didn't get your question.
Mr. Maxwell suggested that we take just a straw vote, suggesting that we follow the advice of our 2 consultants, that we go ahead and explore the possibility of the RANs without backing of the county general fund.
Well, that's what I wanted to be able to talk with the board about before we make these decisions.
Okay, all this is just to get a feeling of those remaining here in the room as to whether they would follow through with this suggestion, and that way then we can put it on the agenda so we can have a conversation about it.
Right. I don't mind helping them any way they can, but I think we need to look at this real serious
Okay,
at this time And the board need to sit down and really come up with some good decisions.
All right. Yes, Ms. Schwartz.
Since I didn't see everybody raise their hand, do you mind explaining what's going to happen if we don't go out and there are payment delays, just so people understand the consequences?
We'd run out of cash,
And just let's spell it out.
and we would have to close the home down.
Okay, do you have any questions on what he just stated, that it is something that we seriously need to pay attention to? Mr. Gima laid that out at the nursing home Board of Directors meeting, and that was actually the precipitous to moving the study session from February to October because of what he is looking at in the future in relationship to the cash flow situation.
Now, let me just add a caveat to that, because we had said that we would, with the RANs, we could limit our delays to our vendors by a maximum of 6 months. If we didn't have the RAN as an option, then we would definitely push our vendors as far as we can to conserve cash. Again, we did that in 2011. Could we do it again? Who knows? But that would be our only other option to conserve cash, would be to delay payment to vendors. And it's potentially doable, but it was tough. We were on the phone almost on a daily basis with vendors, talking about the situations that we're in. So, and again, we've already started to have general conversations with some of our vendors about that we're going to be talking to them about this and letting them know that, we've got these issues with the state, and they're aware of it without question. And, it becomes a domino effect. If we slow down payments to the vendors will have to go to their banks, and they will get lines of credit. I mean, it's without question, because we're not going to be the only nursing home asking them to hold off or allowing us to hold off payments to them. So there's a huge trickle-down effect with what the state is causing with all of the providers, without question.
Yes, Mr. Carter, did I see your hand for a last piece of wisdom for the evening? No? All right. Mr. Weibel?
I move we adjourn.
All right. It's moved and seconded. We are adjourned for the evening. And Mr. Winchell and Mr. Gima, thank you for coming and explaining these things to us, and a safe trip back to St. Louis.